Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, Les and I will be discussing our most disappointing reads of 2018. Unfortunately, there was enough of them that it was worth filming a video, and these disappointing reads are books that we thought or we really wanted to be good, and they just weren't. So they weren't necessarily our worst reads, but they were just something that we had high hopes for and didn't happen.
Expectations were not met.
The first book that I want to talk about that I was disappointed for in 2018, I think it was the first, of the four that I'm going to talk about, it was also the first one that I read, and that was Imagine Wanting Only This by Kristen Radke. This is a graphic memoir, so I borrowed it from the library with hopes that I would really enjoy the format because it was talking about how the author had lost a family member, and she was reflecting on that a lot, but she was also traveling and visiting these sort of like dark, decrepit places, and as a way to deal, I guess, with her grief and loss.
Sense.
And I was very interested to see these dark, creepy, decrepit places that she went to. I felt like the graphic novel focused way too much on the grief and loss and got so deep into it that I wasn't really prepared for that, and I missed like the travel aspect of it, the like visiting these actual places. And it was just, yeah, it was too much a reflection of self and not enough of outside things, which I'm sure some people probably read it and were very interested in the like loss, grief aspect of it. I was interested in the other aspect, and I shouldn't have been, because that really wasn't enough of a focus in the novel, even though that was the impression that I got. I gave it 2 stars.
Too much emotion, not enough description.
I guess, yeah, of like these places. So I was disappointed by that.
Okay. I think that's a reasonable thing to be disappointed by.
Someone else is going to be like, I read that book, you're such an idiot, how could you possibly think it was going to be about this enough to even more?
No, but it makes sense because like it's presented in a graphic format.
Yeah.
Which should sort of indicate to you that you're meant to look at what she's seeing.
Yeah, and I didn't love the style.
Yeah, I was going to ask you at the beginning, like, what's a graphic memoir?
I have the cover image open here on Goodreads, but like, that shows her like in an airport getting ready to travel.
Yeah.
And so my impression from that cover was like, oh, we're going to be seeing a lot of places that she's traveling to. And like, we saw some of them, but it was a lot of other stuff too. So
not to like justify your opinion, but I can understand where you're getting this impression from and why it was disappointing.
Yeah.
Conveniently, mine was also the first of the 4 that I read. It's called God's Behaving Badly by Marie Phillips. And I picked this up at a book sale, I think it was the library book sale in the summer. And I had just finished reading, I think, 3 of the 5 Percy Jackson books. And so I was like, okay, this whole foray into Greek mythology has been really good, and this was presented as like a fun modern take on Greek mythology. And it is about the 12 main gods who are all living in modern day London, and they have to sort of masquerade as normal people and everything, and obviously like something big happens and these 2 normal people get involved and learn that this is the case and blah 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 and have to figure everything out. That's how it goes with disappointing books. You're just like, I think I was so used to the characterizations of each of the gods in Percy Jackson that reading them stylized in a different way was very off-putting. They were also so much more adult in this book because it's a book written for adults.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of things that would never be written into a YA book happening in this book.
And you're like, I wasn't ready for that.
I was not ready for that jump. But also they got very moody very quickly and like removed themselves from the story, so there'd be pages where like one of them is brooding in a corner about what's happened, and I was like, this is just boring at this point. And I didn't think that the ending was very well done. It sort of ended with this big proclamation, and suddenly the whole world now believes in a new truth, and I didn't find that very believable. And it was a short enough book, thank goodness, but it took me a longer time than I anticipated to read it, just because it became uninteresting very quickly.
That kind of plays into my next one with it took me a really long time to read it, longer than it should have, and that's The Child Finder by Renee Denfeld. She wrote The Enchanted, which was my favorite book that I read in 2017, so I was excited at the prospect of this book coming out because it did have an intriguing plotline where we have this woman who is just really good at finding missing children. She has the skills. She is a child that like came from the woods when she was young, and she doesn't know much about her past, and this older woman took her in and everything, and so she's kind of used that upbringing to help other kids that go missing and help their families find them, and that intrigued me. Like, that is a cool premise right there. The thing was, it was the way the story was told, so we followed her perspective, this woman. You do also hear a bit from the little girl as well, but she's like 5, so she doesn't totally understand everything that's happening. So as a 5-year-old, reading from a 5-year-old's perspective is confusing sometimes. So I appreciated everything that was from the woman's perspective, but any of the other perspectives were not for me. And I had heard mixed reviews about it already, so I went into it with lower expectations than I would have for The Enchanted because I loved it so much. I was like, okay, it's going to be hard to repeat this, but hopefully The Child Finder will like still be decent. I'm prepared for that, but I was disappointed beyond even what I had prepared myself for, and it just really made me sad because I wanted to like it, and there were certain parts of it that I did like, but it took me a really long time to read it because every time we got to a chapter that wasn't the woman's point of view, I was like, ugh, great. Like, can we just go back to hearing from her perspective, please? Because her part, she was like searching, the mystery was there.
You see, I hate to say this because I haven't read a lot of nonfiction, and I really wanted to like this book. So I read this book for the book club that I'm a part of and I now lead, and it is called The Woman's Hour by Elaine Weiss, and it is a nonfiction account. It's a new book. It came out in March of the right to win the vote. It's the women's suffrage movement in Tennessee at the time. The amendment was being ratified to the U.S. Constitution, and it is a very big book. It's about 500 pages long.
That's hefty.
It was very heavy to carry around. The text was very small. There were a lot of pictures, like real source material, diaries and photographs from the past. The way it was told, I think, really appeals to some people, and it did not work for me because she was trying to tell the story of these women from both sides, of the suffrage movement and the women who didn't want it. And where their allegiances all were with the men who were making the decisions at the time, because of course there were no women in Congress or in the legislature. So she tells the story from like the moment that this one woman who's leading the movement arrives in Tennessee, and she gets to the vote at the end, and these things will happen on a timeline. Fine, great. And so she's working to tell that story. But at each thing, there is a new person introduced, and she stops telling the story and goes back and gives us that person's whole history to enough pages to the point where you forget what's even going on.
Yeah.
And it's in the middle of a chapter.
Way too much.
Each thing is not like its own chapter. It keeps going like this, and so it feels like it takes forever to get to the end of the story.
That's why it's 500 pages.
And it was, I don't know how to suggest a way that it could have been done better. But it just felt so long, and I had a month to read it, and I finished it with 5 minutes to spare. Like, book club is at 6 o'clock, and I finished it at 5:55 because I was like, I'm gonna read this book. I'm gonna read the whole thing.
Yeah. So
I have an accurate account to talk about. But God, if I could have quit it, I just would have been so much happier.
If you had been reading it on your own, not in that book club setting, you definitely would have been like, nope. DNF it.
Yeah.
Nope.
And I really wanted to like it because that's a period in history that I am really interested in. But
the way it was told,
I just need a
too
new,
frustrating.
Yeah.
Number 3 for me, this is gonna make Leslie so sad. One of my disappointing reads was Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury.
I'm disappointed in you.
Well, let me give you some reasons why. Yeah, here's my case. So I read this for Banned Books Week because the book has been banned many times, and it's one of those books that I just never read in high school because it was one of those times where you could read a couple different books, and I went with the other option instead. So I never read Fahrenheit 451 in school, and because people constantly talk about it and it's referenced so much, and I definitely heard overall positive responses to it, I wanted to give it a try. The edition that I had was the 60th anniversary edition, I believe.
Really beautiful.
It's really nice. I got it at Book Outlet, and the presentation of it really appealed to me. Come to find out, the book is like half of it, and the second half of it is just
short.
extra stuff. And I didn't even realize it was that short. Like, I'd seen it before, but it just didn't click to me that, like, oh, this whole thing isn't the story. Only like half of this is. The other half is like all these people reflecting in it because it's the 60th anniversary edition. So anyway, that was the first disappointment because I felt like the story needed to be longer.
Okay.
There was interesting things that like were starting to happen, and then it just kind of felt like it was rushed through.
Okay.
Like, I can't say too much because I don't want to spoil it, so to say, even though it's been out for many years, but I'm not here to like break it all down, you know? But I just felt like there was a lot of potential that was quickly dashed, and the like dystopian elements of it were presented, and then it was like, okay, like, this is kind of cool. And then we'd go back to him and his wife.
Okay.
And, like, that sort of plodded along a bit, and then it would, like, pick up. It just felt like it was kind of back and forth. And I still gave it 3 stars because I felt like the story was there, but I just wanted more. Like, I didn't hate it, but I was definitely disappointed just because I'd heard so many good things about it, and it just didn't go where I thought it was going to go or where I wanted it to go. And I felt like the stuff that was interesting to me was like touched upon and then pulled away from.
It's like ice skating. It's like you ice skate over the story as opposed to like being pushed off the cliff.
And I think if it had been longer, we would have been able to get into more of that stuff, and I would have appreciated that, the more like dystopian, less like in his head stuff and more of the dystopian stuff.
Okay. So I had the opportunity to go to New York City earlier this year and see a musical called Be More Chill. And up until that point where someone asked me if I wanted to join them to go see it, I had only sort of tangentially heard of the book that the musical is based off of. And so I was like, all right, you know what, before I do this, I'm going to read the book and see what I'm about to walk into. Because I knew that the show was a little bit science fiction-y and I was like, but I think this is a YA book, so how are they going to do this? So I went to the library and I got the book and I read it in a day. It's quite short. It is about this kid who is just, you know, nobody likes him at school, and he's an outcast, etc., etc. He has like this one friend who also nobody likes, and so he takes this pill that he pays way too much for, and it's actually like a supercomputer from Japan, and it lodges inside of his brain and tells him, like, takes over his whole body and tells him how to be cool or how to be more chill. It just wasn't like, I read it in a day because it was short, and because, like I was saying earlier, it was a YA book that I could get in and follow the plot, and it was easily written. Yeah. But like Jeremy, and I think he was meant to be this way, was just so irritatingly just unmotivated as a person, and like had resigned himself to the fact that like he was this outcast teenager and no one was ever gonna like him, he was never gonna achieve this, and like there's this girl named Christine that he has a crush on, and like he can't get anywhere with her because he can't bring himself to like get out of his own head and do it. And I was like, dude, come on, like you're not trying. I felt like he wasn't trying. Someone's gonna call me on that, but I felt like he wasn't trying hard enough. And there were a bunch of tiny little things that happened that did not make it into the show. And I actually wound up liking the show more than I enjoyed the book, because they changed a lot of it in a way that I didn't appreciate. As someone who likes to see exact text to film replications, I did not appreciate the changes that they made in this particular fashion. But it's fine. It's a great show. But they skipped over a lot of the points in the book where like he does kind of start to try and then falls back a little bit, and I don't know what could have been better about it, but it was not
it just wasn't for you in the end.
I think I'm sort of not the demographic it was written for. It feels like someone wrote it for a middle school boy. Like, books don't have genders, but I feel like it was written for that demographic, and not being that demographic, it did not work out. But I did enjoy the show. It's going to Broadway if you can go see it. It's really great performance.
Just don't bother with the source material if that
Which
doesn't sound...
I hate to say.
But if that doesn't sound intriguing to you, then why bother, right?
Exactly.
There's so many other things that you could read instead. The last book that I have to talk about is one that makes me really, really sad to say that this disappointed me, because I had built it up for a long time and because everything I have ever heard from anyone has been positive. So I had no negative...
Too much hype.
Way too much hype, even though this book has been out since the 30s, and it's Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I wanted to like this book so much because I wanted to be like...
It's your namesake book.
It's like, I mean, I'm not named for the book, but it's great to have a book that people love so much that shares your name. It's fun.
And that you like, too.
Yeah, except I didn't like it because it was disappointing. So this book, as many of you will know, follows a nameless main character who marries this man named Max de Winter, and they go back to Manderley together, which is where Max lives, and this is in the south of England. And turns out that Max's previous wife, Rebecca, has this huge hold over the household, and she was such this presence that everybody is like, oh, Rebecca this, Rebecca that, and this nameless main character is like so uncomfortable in her new setting, but there's something up, like something's weird, something's off, and you don't know what it is. The main housekeeper who loved Rebecca is like super creepy, and like Max is definitely hiding something, but you don't know what it is.
This sounds very White Sargasso Sea.
The moments of creepiness were few and far between, unfortunately, so you'd get 3 chapters of high society nonsense, which was boring as hell, and I just didn't care. And then you'd get 1 chapter where something really freaking weird happens, but you're like, what's going on? I want to know what's going on. And then, because our nameless main character has the spine of a jellyfish, like nothing would happen, and like that's part of her character. Okay. She's come from this world where she's always been subservient to other people, and now she's technically like the woman of the house, but she can never be like Rebecca,
so she like
was the woman of the house. She can't get herself to that presence that Rebecca had. I don't want to hate on her too much because I understand why she's like that, but oh my god, it was so frustrating to read because I was like, just speak up for yourself. Just like say like 2 lines and it'll make everything do something. Don't just sit there and be demure and like, yeah, I mean, I know that's her character, so it's kind of hard to get mad at her because that's just the way she is. But, oh man, it was frustrating. Then the creepy things would happen, and I'd be like, oh yes, ooh, we get 2 chapters of creepy things, and then we'd be like, back to the high society, throwing a party, meeting with these people, and there was just a lot of filler of characters being talked to that I didn't care about, and I don't know if that's because that was the 1930s, and so books were a little slower back then. There wasn't as much like go, go, go. So that could have been that influence. It could have also been du Maurier just telling the story that way, like that maybe that was the way she wanted it to be done. So it's hard for me to say, and I'm sure there are many of you out there who have read this book and analyzed it for school, for university, whatever, and so you have more of like this broad view than I do as somebody that just picked it up and read it. There was an afterword in the book that talked about du Maurier's life and kind of the similarities in the book to her and her growing up and like how she inserted aspects of herself into the story. So that was interesting. But it still didn't fix the issues that I had with it and like the stuff that just made me sad. So I think I gave it 3 stars because it was still like a well-written story in terms of how it was actually written, even if I didn't agree with the content. Once we get to like the last 4th of the book, things are like happening pretty quickly, so that helped. So I ended on a better note. Okay. And like the book kind of ends on a cliffhanger, which is interesting.
Because it's a standalone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just, overall, very disappointed. I was so hoping that I was really going to like the book, and it just didn't work out for me, and my reading personality, I think. It just didn't quite fit.
Well, my last book in this category is Deja Ed by Kathy Reichs, which is the first book in her Temperance Brennan mystery series, and also the start of the series, which then spurred the television program Bones, which we both have watched a lot of in our lifetime.
Yeah, not the whole thing.
Not the whole thing, but we were quite adamant about watching it when we were in high school. Some friends of mine who are in this book club with me picked up this book when we had a month where we weren't going to meet and said, well, let's just read something that we choose. And so we had been talking about science fiction books and mystery books, and we landed on this. It's very different from the television show, which I knew going in. Temperance Brennan is not the same Temperance Brennan that is portrayed by Emily Deschanel. They've definitely given her different personalities, different little quirks, different ways of speaking and interacting with everyone. The character is not the same, and I knew that. That being said, I did not like the one that I read. I felt she had no concern for anybody else's safety, much less her own. She didn't take direction well. For a scientist, I feel like you're supposed to understand where the limits are and follow things, and you're supposed to have an interest beyond what you can see, but not when it comes to, like, falling in a ditch and almost getting murdered and then being unconscious for 12 hours. Like, there has to be a line. So she didn't do that. She didn't have any regard for authority or for the police, and none of the other characters obviously were interested in helping her do anything because she just did her own thing and didn't listen and follow directions. Yeah, exactly. Like, no one's gonna help you or respond to your requests when you're running off into danger and, like, leaving them to pick up the pieces after you. So that drove me nuts about her. I think it also has a lot to do with the time that it was written. It's set in the 90s. I think it's written in like 92 or 93 in Montreal. It's interesting to read it now from like a Me Too era type perspective, because there is some touching on of like prostitution and just the way that women are treated and who is respected by who. Like, she is a doctor and she has a title, and yet, you know, she's respected in the scientific community, but all of these guys who are in the police force that think that she's just like this ridiculous woman. So it's interesting to read it from that perspective as well, and it was just sort of saddening to know that that was sort of the way it was back then. I don't want to read the next one. Yeah. Is the thing. Because there's also, like, this Ryan guy, Detective Ryan, who I think she's supposed to probably, like, get with at some point, because she makes a lot of mentions of it. But she never does. And then they have this weird moment at the end where he, like, touches her shoulder, and it's supposed to be significant. And
like,
it's, like,
sparks fly,
the most
they just fizzle.
inane thing in the whole world. And
yeah.
So then I went and read the rest of the summaries of the rest of them on Wikipedia, and I even still, now that I know what happens, don't want to bother to read
you're
it.
like, whatever. Yeah, because I did read that book as well, but I read it a long time ago, back when I think I was still watching Bones on TV, so I was interested in checking out the source material, and I also felt similarly. I don't remember the details of why I felt that way, but I didn't continue with the other books because I just didn't like it that much. Yeah. So it's unfortunate, but I definitely understand where you're coming from.
And there were these passages of medical or just scientific jargon, like people taking 4 or 5 pages to explain what they were doing to a dead body, which felt unnecessary. And I get that, like, if you're writing hard science fiction, then fine. People that want to read hard science fiction will go in search of that. But in a murder mystery that is supposed to, like, intrigue you, 4 pages of telling me how you're, like, getting underneath someone's fingernails to pull out the different, like, debris and bacteria. I don't know any of those words. Your average reader doesn't know any of those words.
Yeah,
it doesn't. It's too far, and it jars you out of the plot.
Those are the books, yeah. 8 books that we unfortunately were disappointed by this year. If you had some books that you read this year that you also found to be thoroughly disappointing, you can tell us which ones those were down below, and you can certainly tell us why, maybe without being super spoilery in case somebody else is wanting to read that book, but I'd be curious to know which ones you did not enjoy this year, because everyone likes to share a little bit of anger sometimes with books that they were hoping would be good, and then they just really fall short.
Especially if they were popular, because I'm reading a book right now that Rebecca has already read, and she does not enjoy, and I'm really loving it, so yeah. Always curious to see people's takes on things.
As always, all of our links are down in the doobly-doo. You guys can go check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you guys very much for watching, and now it's time to bring this video to a close.
So my normal face.